Welcome to episode 14 of the Alcon Maddox War Plan webinar series. I'm Richard Ritchie. Today I'm excited to be joined by Mario Veljovic, veteran of the ICT industry and general manager at award-winning value-added distributor VAD Technologies. Say hello, Mario.
Hi, everyone.
Excellent. Well, look, for those of you who don't know me already, I run a niche recruitment and executive search firm based here in the UAE. We specialize in sourcing sales and commercial leadership talent for the IT channel industry. Now, typical roles that we work on include channel and partnerships managers, head of sales, director of sales, commercial director, VP of sales, country manager, and general manager, to name a few. Now, I've actually spent the last 25 years building and leading high-performing sales teams, and I know just how important it is to install the right commercial leader within an organization. This obviously has a direct impact on value, or how quickly you can actually penetrate a market, but also in times like we're in at the moment, how readily we can actually protect the underlying revenue that we've worked so hard to gain over the last few years. Now, over the last few months, we've helped a number of organizations recruit sales leaders remotely to open channels, both here in the Middle East and in Singapore. So if any of you on the call today would like to get an insight into the talent targeting system that we employ in order to identify the top 15% of talent in the market, then please just type talent in the chat box and I'll reach out to you for private conversation after this session. Now, that said, today is obviously not about recruitment, nor is it about me. It's actually about you. And I'm talking specifically now to business managers within the IT channel industry. Now, over the past few months, I've actually spoken to many of you on the call today to get a better sense of what your top of mind challenges are in this time of COVID-19. Some of you are already part of the mastermind community, which has been set up to tackle this crisis head on from a business perspective. Now, these top of mind challenges are really what's been driving the content of this webinar series. And this is not only my way of giving back to the IT community, but also in an attempt to kind of bring us closer together so that we may support each other in this time of crisis and set ourselves up to thrive rather than simply survive. Over the last 4 months, we've covered topics already like the increased threat to cybersecurity born out of working from home, fast-tracking digital transformation, safeguarding reputation for a post-COVID-19 world, managing a partner ecosystem during a crisis, and solving business problems with AI. Each week, as you know, we bring in different industry experts to help us piece together strategies to overcome these challenges, and this week is no different. At the end of this series, we'll be compiling all of these strategies in the form of a white paper, so if you'd like to receive a copy of the white paper, please stay to the end of today's session and I'll give you some information on how you can obtain a copy. So, with that said, and before I hand over to Mario to get started on our topic, Mario, I don't think there really is anyone better to address the topic of how does a distributor remain relevant. But before we dive into that exciting topic, why don't you just give us a little bit of information about yourself for those who perhaps don't know you already.
Yeah, I'm Mario Veljovic. I'm 25 years now in the IT distribution, and obviously have seen all the changes over those years, and spent already 17 years here out in the Middle East, which is a very exciting market to be with because it has a very different characters to what you see probably in some of the European markets, and have been working with multinational and local distribution companies across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And yeah, very excited to be here. I love this topic, and thank you so much, Richard, for inviting me. And yeah, I'm very excited to see how this day will go, and this hour now with everybody will go. And I'm very happy to see so many questions coming in and so much of interest to come in for this topic.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting when we talk about remaining relevant, as we were just discussing before the call. Obviously, the focus today is distribution, but the reality is, I think some of the lessons and some of the strategies that we'll go through today can be applied to any business within the IT ecosystem, but I think even beyond the IT ecosystem when we talk about remaining relevant from both from a partner perspective and also a customer perspective. But do you want to just outline, Mario? I think one of the things you and I were discussing just last night about if we talk about distribution specifically, just I guess what you were talking about was the need to remain true to ourselves, if you like, as distributors, and really to own what we do. Do you want to perhaps just shed a bit of light onto that before we jump into the topic? Because I think it was a really interesting topic you mentioned.
I mean, why I like this topic so much is because the question itself entails like there would be any doubt that distribution would remain relevant. And I can assure you, like for these 25 years I am in IT distribution, I had this question probably from the first day I joined the distribution company, that distribution would actually go out of business and if there's actually no need. And you have seen new business models actually emerging of people selling direct. But I can assure you that at least in the span of my career, I have seen more companies who started off in a direct business model to actually come to distribution than I have seen actually IT vendors moving away from distribution and decided to actually go on a direct only model. And I think what is very important, first of all, is that you obviously have the right business setup, which is the fundamentals. I mean, you need to make sure that obviously you are financially equipped in order to really run your business. And then I think it's all about like making sure that you actually accept your identity as an IT distributor. I think I have seen it too many times that people trying to remain relevant by actually changing the game. And many times start competing with manufacturers or start competing with their customers and their managed service partners and the channel partners out there. And I think that is a very dangerous thing. I think we have seen that where, I mean, let's say PC components distributors wanted to be a PC brand, or mobile phone distributors wanted to be a tablet brand, for example, or I've seen even distributors going and trying to sell direct because they believe that they can actually do it than the partners, which has made them a distributor at the end.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I think that, as again we discussed last night, I think sometimes when we see companies wanting to change or overspill into different territories, should we say, and I don't mean territories in geographically, I mean territories in different people within the partner ecosystem. Some companies, I think, perhaps doing it out of the feeling of necessity, perhaps to not just necessarily remain relevant, just to make money, perhaps in a time like we're in at the moment. So, you know, you're certainly seeing a lot of companies move into the, let's say, the cloud space or cybersecurity, which is, one might say, perhaps a bit overpopulated at the moment with the amount of people that are moving into it. But the reality is, if we remain true to our own values and vision, as long as we adhere to some basic principles, then we're better off doing that, right? That's how we can ensure our business continuity, which kind of leads us into, I think, the first strategy, if you like, when it comes to how we remain relevant, and that's one regarding constant partner engagement. So do you want to walk us through what you mean, or what rather constant partner engagement means to you, Mario?
I mean, partner engagement obviously means that, yes, as a distributor, you are the one who's responsible to actually bring in the latest and the greatest technologies into your ecosystem, which you have developed over time. Obviously, we have chosen to take a route on actually scouting disruptive and very innovative technologies in order to position ourselves in the market space. And I think that is what you need to do. You need to make sure that you always stay very close to your partners, making sure that they always are in the driver's seat. Always work alongside them, even if it's sometimes the harder way. And I can tell you, when you have some very, let's say, futuristic, innovative, disruptive technologies which you promote in the market, it is not the largest system integrators which are welcoming you with open arms, because you might compete with some of their product portfolio which they have from some other vendors. So you might need to start off with some other partners which you recruit, which are equally excited about new technologies and disruptive technologies, and you make sure that you start actually fishing in the big boys' backyard, if you want, and you start showing some wins, and that will obviously get you the attention even from the larger partners at one point of time. And I think that is very important, that this constant partner engagement, understanding, listening into the partners of what they have to say, and not ignoring them by maybe trying to find a shortcut and say, oh, let me talk directly to end customers and let me build a business development team and actually compete with the partners, but then ultimately maybe using them in order to execute the transaction.
Yeah, it's interesting. It just brings me to a question that was raised by Subramani, who submitted the question yesterday. So I'll just read out what he said regarding this relationship. So what he said here is customers are now inherently a lot. So this is a system integrator, to be clear. So customers are now inherently a lot more aware of options, solutions available to them, given the amount of information they have access to. OEMs are now dictating business and terms to both SIs and distributors, making their relationship highly transactional. So how do you, Mario, manage such relationships and ensure that both customer and OEMs understand the value that you bring as a distributor?
I mean, it's a very good question, because yes, that's what we have seen over many years, especially here in the Middle East, developing, that there's much more control from the OEMs or the vendors or manufacturers, as we call them. And I think that the current pandemic is actually even a game changer in this. I think the more we go upstream, or the more we go away from the customer towards the suppliers, we see that they have difficulties to actually retain their relationships. And I think that the system integrators are actually getting back into control, and the managed service partners, as they have a constant engagement with customers, and they are much better placed in order to be the trusted advisor which the customer is actually looking into it. I mean, it's definitely true for, let's say, the mainstream IT, that obviously the OEMs have obviously a lot to say, and probably can even dictate terms and driving the business actually from their side. But when it comes to obviously disruptive technologies, I mean, these are sometimes vendors which are not even locally present. And this is where obviously we as distributors can add a lot of value, and where obviously partners building a very important factor in order to convince customers that this is a fully tested solution, and that will help you to lower your total cost of ownership and drive very fast ROI, which is what customers are looking at the moment anyway.
Just out of interest, so do you play a role upstream with manufacturers when it comes to developing either new tech or features for existing tech that to keep them relevant to, you know, the downstream customers? Do they look to you for those insights and that kind of advice, or do they make their own decisions and they're just passing things down through you to the customer? Does that make sense?
Obviously, they do consult us and seeing like, okay, what is the feedback which we are getting, especially because for many of the vendors which we actually represent, we even represent them from a service delivery perspective, because initially maybe they are not set up, so we become their authorized service partner, for example, so helping the vendor itself in order to maintain the install base which they have in the region. And that obviously helps us to gain a lot of insights, and obviously gives us many times even a lot of confidence, because, for example, if we have even spare parts in our warehouse which we have to hold in order for any eventuality, in order to deliver the service level agreements which has been agreed, and we know that we never have to pull out these spare parts from the warehouse, we can obviously go very confident into a discussion and say, listen, I have X amount of $1,000 of spare parts lying there, but they're actually getting just dusty because the solution is so reliable that we don't have any break and fix requirements. And that obviously excites us then to actually drive more and more business. So we are actually more probably supporting the vendors downstream than we're actually supporting them upstream. But then, of course, yes, they're taking the insights from us, and we have actually a very rigid system in place in order to reporting back on weekly, monthly, quarterly basis.
We've got a question from Tarek. This is actually one of the ones we discussed last night also. So how, I guess from a distribution perspective, so this is Tarek. Tarek works for a distributor actually in Saudi Arabia. So how do you spread the wealth, I guess, within the ecosystem, but then also to share the pain during COVID-19 also?
I think it's the nature of a distribution company to be always being extremely supportive. So I don't feel, let's say, any major difference in what we're actually doing. What we're obviously doing is like we're using even this pandemic in order to support our partner ecosystem, in order to have more access to, let's say, what we call NFR, not for resale equipment, for example, so that they can even use these technologies which we are selling ourselves in order to improve their productivity. I think that is one way of probably giving back to the community or helping them. Besides, obviously, all the very normal things, I would call it, you have to do in terms of supporting partners, in terms of payment terms, helping them out on credit limit requirements and stuff like this, or even help them even with remote support, more than usual. But I would say that we actually do, we continue doing what we do, but we probably have to step up in the game and are stepping up in this game in order to support even more, so that we all go through this without any casualties.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that the payment terms one is quite an interesting one, because sometimes, because this came up in a conversation we had a few weeks ago on a different session. I think HP at the time had just extended payment terms from, I think, 30 to 90 days maybe. And it was just a question of, okay, how is that then passed down the channel? You know, because if that's just one relationship benefiting from extended payment terms, then how do we make sure that that benefit is passed on? But then also, are we just kicking the pebble further down the road, you know, kicking the can further down the road when it comes to the frustration of a non-payment? So I think obviously relaxing payment terms is certainly one way to ease relationships, but I think getting closer perhaps to people sometimes is a way of ensuring, even if we kick the can down the road a few months with regards to payments, then getting closer to the partner is a definite way of ensuring that we're perhaps high on the priority list when it comes to settling bills, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's what we have done. I mean, we have been very fortunate in order to be supported by many of our vendors actually in offering extended payment terms, and wherever possible and required, we have even extended them. And I think that is a responsibility we all have, and probably that's even part of or answers part of Tarek's question as well, in terms of like how do we actually do it. Unfortunately, sometimes you see even people taking advantage of it. Probably you see the usual suspects in order to be, let's say, not on-time payers, to probably use the current pandemic as an issue. But obviously we have, let's say, good enough relationships with our partners in order to really understand if there is a need. I mean, we have a lot of partners who worked with the hospitality industry, for example, and that was really shut down. I mean, there were actually no people to actually process payments, and that has obviously impacted their cash flow. And we have helped manage this as much as possible. Definitely,
and I think you're right. There definitely needs to be an element of understanding and clarity over what perhaps the new expectations are based on the current environment, and those things articulated in the right way can definitely help with the longevity of the relationship. So just sticking with the partner, constant partner engagement for a moment, what are the so there's a few points we discussed. So obviously the longevity of distributors, I think we've kind of handled this already. The customer partner approach, management leadership mindset. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I think this well, I'm always stressing this point of making sure that first of all you accept your identity as a distributor, which means that don't go with manufacturers, don't compete with your customers, and then find value you can add to the business you do today. That means even that there are no shortcuts, so you need to probably start getting engaged with new technologies, which you don't know what will be the outcome. So yes, we are driven very much by efficiency, creating efficiency, and I think for distributors, economy of scale and efficiency are the key drivers of profitability at the end. But we still need to make sure that we set time and resources and energy aside in order to look at these new technologies which are there. And I think that is one of the, let's say, successes in order to stay relevant in the distribution business, because the business model has been changing. The fundamentals has never changed. Distribution is all about economy of scale. We all want to scale out the business, but we never know where it's actually going. I mean, remember vendors like, I mean, when we talk about virtualization, for example, I mean, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I mean, people were not really considering virtualization as something which will be a breakthrough. And now we know where are those vendors today who have introduced this. We ourselves, we were the first one to actually introduce all flash arrays for the data center space, and I mean the whole market was in denial. I mean, they were like the leaders in this segment. They were actually making funny videos on YouTube, making fun of all these new kids on the block, and today I think that is the breakthrough of the technology. But then, and I discussed it actually with one of my colleagues yesterday, and he reminded me as well that sometimes it is not even necessarily the technology which is the disruption which is coming to the market. For example, when we talk about like all-flash arrays, it was like all-flash, that was the disruption which was coming in, and people said, no, come on, how is it possible that we would have probably like memory which is on an Apple phone suddenly in a data center, and that would not really work out. But today, some of those vendors have even developed new go-to markets which are disruptive. So the go-to market can be even sometimes disruptive in terms of giving evergreen subscription options for your data center equipment, which was very new, because before it was all very heavy CapEx investment, and suddenly somebody is changing the game by saying, look, listen, I give it to you as an OPEX, and I'm going to make sure that your IT infrastructure always remains up to date. And I think that's what I mean by the leadership mindset, that we constantly stress ourselves to think of what we have to do in order to stay relevant, and that we even not sparing, let's say, the efforts in order to go and experiment sometimes. I mean, you can obviously make a legacy out of this later in a seller. Oh yeah, you know, I remember, you know, like 6 years ago, I hunted this great vendor. You know, it was a very fragmented market, and we won. We picked the right one because it was my vision. I saw it already, and I think that is not correct. It is a lot of trial and error. It is obviously doing a lot of research to the best of your ability, understanding what is happening in your ecosystem, in your personal context. Where are people moving? And obviously making research using the Gartner's Magic Quadrant, for example, or even working very closely with B2B channel advisory boards in the US, in Europe, or even in Asia Pacific. And then obviously from all of these information, making something meaningful so that you could actually use it to build something. But what is important is that your mindset is there. You don't just think of like, you know, this vendor, I don't know, if I can't do, let's say, $5 million in a year with it, and I don't get that much of margin guaranteed from the beginning, then, I mean, it's not worth starting it. No, you need to try. And I can tell you a lot of the relationships which are very successful for us were very painful to get it actually off the ground and starting it and investing heavily into it. But this is how you actually build your business and keep constantly growing by adding more and more of those vendors.
100%. And I think a lot of businesses can, it's a good lesson to learn, you know, and I think just doing business in the Middle East is very different from doing business in the West, say, certainly in the UK, whereby in the UK you almost you prove yourself with numbers, and then someone will become a partner, and then you build a relationship. Whereas here, the relationship is front loaded, right? You build the relationship with respect, and then once you have the relationship, the numbers are almost secondary to some extent. Obviously, they need to make business sense, but the reality is, as long as you have that relationship and trust, someone will give you a shot. They'll do business with you. But sometimes building that relationship, as you said, you have to invest in that. And sometimes the most painful investment from a business perspective is time, because time not earning money, you're constantly questioning, will this relationship pay off? And I think having that, like I said, that leadership mindset where you understand, no, there is value in this relationship. Let's pursue it, because let's be fair, we all want to be in business 5-10 years from now. This isn't a quick win by any stretch of the imagination. So investing the time up front now to develop those relationships that will serve all parties in the future is highly important, I think.
It's very good what you mentioned, because it's and I think that is what you see a lot in Dubai, obviously, because we are predominantly expat driven economy out here as well. So people might have more of short-term, mid-term objectives than they have long-term objectives, and I think that the market dynamics are even changing. So I mean, what you could probably achieve in a year, you probably will now achieve in 3 years, and the market is changing. But you need to always have this mindset, making sure that you're setting the time aside in order to explore and building this trust, which you even mentioned. I mean, I had a call actually earlier today as well, where we were talking exactly about this one, because sometimes you can make maybe mistakes by starting off the relationship in the wrong way, because we can only go, let's say, full-fledged into these relationships if we can really trust each other. So the whole trust element is so important, probably more important in these in this disruptive technology market in order to really understand, is that really something worth investing into it? At the end, it is not a charity business which we're running. I mean, we are even answerable in terms of what we're doing, and but still we need to experiment sometimes.
Well, the key to what you do, I guess, is in your name, right? Value. And that's the thing that needs to be reiterated constantly, both upstream and downstream. You know, what value do you bring to this relationship? How can you help me serve my customers or gain access to a market? And that sometimes I think we almost, because it's inherent in what we do, we forget that we have to actually sell that to some extent. You know, I was spending a lifetime in sales, and one of the key principles of sales is, do I have the right to close? Well, you've only got the right to close if you've done all the kind of preamble and you've built the relationship, you demonstrated the value, because to ask for the money, they say you've got no right to do that unless you've demonstrated your willingness to have this relationship in the first place. I think it's, I guess probably leads into what the next point, which is distribution fundamentals. So do you want to just wrap up the first part of it, constant partner engagement, if we discuss distribution fundamentals before we move on to the search for disruptive tech?
Absolutely, I mean, with pleasure. I mean, it's like, I mean, obviously distribution fundamentals. I mean, what I mean by this is obviously that you understand that your role is to build economy of scale at the end. So you need to actually, and accordingly, you need to make sure that your business is financially even set up in that way. And I think in the past, I mean, even the region was maybe spoiled by this massive growth which we had, and you could literally start off with nothing. But today, you need to have those fundamentals in place, and running it by those fundamentals, making sure that your business is financially set up in that way that you can really deliver the growth on the long run, because there is not that much of, let's say, an organic capital growth happening as probably your business is growing. So you need to prepare for this, and those are things which are. But besides talking all about like what value we want to add and how much disruptive technologies we want to bring in, and AI and robotics and what have you, ultimately we need to come down. And again, that's why I'm stressing this point all the time with people I'm talking about this subject about, is that, you know, make sure that you understand you're a distributor and then set up your business accordingly. That means even that if you have to build economy of scale, you need to be a multiplier at the end. So you can only grow by efficiency and by economy of scale at the end into your profitability. You can't do that if you keep actually growing your cost base too much. And this is exactly where sometimes distribution can go wrong, because they try to probably have too much of an end customer touch.
Yeah, 100%. I think the key word you mentioned there is as a distributor, you're a multiplier. And unless that's constantly kept top of mind as you organize your business, let's say, you're clearly going to perhaps trip over your own feet to some extent.
And we try to explain this to our partners and I mean our existing and even our future and new partnerships which we're having, where we always be very strict in trying to make people even understand that we take our responsibility as a distributor very serious, and we keep telling them that we are actually a matchmaker. Right, and this is what we do. We bring people together. I mean, we don't manufacture anything, and we don't go and I mean, maybe even service. Sometimes we support, but ultimately we want the partners even to actually do this. That we want them to drive the business out there, and we are here to mediate, to do the matchmaking, bringing all of this together, and obviously having this massive multiplier effect, or you can even call it a turbocharger if you want, in order to help businesses in the region to actually scale up faster than they would if they probably just go on their own. And I have sometimes, it's interesting, I have sometimes different industries even coming to us, talking to us. For example, now obviously the fintech industry is booming, and even they come up sometimes to us as distributors and say, listen, I mean, you're talking to like companies who are selling HR software, we have this and this, it goes into the same segment. Do you think your partners would be interested to actually take that service on board? Because they would be overwhelmed in order to talk to like 2,000 partners in the region if they are a small startup with people. I mean, they would probably never land in front of the right desk in order to sell something.
Yeah. No, quite right. Like you say, I think it can be quite overwhelming for a younger company trying to access a market where there's, but also it's a very quick way to do a litmus test, right? To gain feasibility. Is this? But again, it relies on having a good relationship with a distributor that is going to provide them with honest insight about the market, which could ultimately affect the direction of their business. So that's fascinating stuff. So we covered now the constant partner engagement. So everyone else on the call, if you want to, be really interesting to hear what your insights are, what we've just been discussing. While we wait for some of the insights to come through, Mario, I just want to read out one other question because this leads into the next section nicely. So the next section or strategy, if you like, is the ongoing search for disruptive tech. Now, obviously, this is the main focus for what you guys do as a disruptive tech distributor. One of the questions that came in last night was, it'd be really interesting to hear about play-to-win strategies for new distributors that want to enter the market, and what elements of their business should they mainly focus on for the initial stage. And this has come from Rainer, who's a business strategy consultant.
Yeah, it's probably like, we can probably take this offline, and we can actually I give you some tips on what technologies you should actually use, which I have maybe still in store, but I haven't started on. But let me give you a little bit more on a broader outline how I would probably go about without probably being able to give let's say an exact recommendation on which vendors you should actually do. I think there are a few things, and I mentioned this earlier as well. I think there are 3 things you should actually look at, especially if you are, let's say, setting up a new distribution business in the region. So you obviously start with nothing. So you obviously need to get the acceptance and the trust from your partner ecosystem. And you need to start on the other side, even finding a product. I mean, I'm saying this many times that for distributors setting up here, they're always having this challenge in terms of either I have a vendor contract and I don't have partners and a team to sell, or I maybe have, let's say, partners and I have a team, but I maybe don't have a vendor which is actually giving me material which I can sell to my ecosystem. Always have these 2 little planets which you need to actually bring together. So what you should obviously do is you should obviously start looking into your ecosystem. And I have this even for myself. I know that I am good in certain technologies and I'm terribly bad in other technologies, because this is not the ecosystem I'm coming from myself. And I mean, I started my career off in selling hard drives and PC components. So storage is, for example, an area which I feel more secure, more comfort, not because of my knowledge about this, but more of I have seen people over the last 25 years moving inside that industry of storage. And they have got into certain positions or joined certain companies, which were then obviously becoming interesting for us, for example, to onboard them and helping them to promote their sales. So what I would obviously look into is look into the ecosystem you have, the context you have. There are great people out there who wants to take the challenge and moving into a startup, and why not working alongside them and help them to actually develop the market. That will obviously give you an entry into system integrators and partners, and then you start building step by step. And I mentioned this earlier, it is exactly what you need to do when you take a new technology to the market. You need to obviously start fishing in the backyard of the big boys, because if suddenly one of these big system integrators are losing a deal inside their #1 client to a smaller system integrator with a complete new technology, they start realizing something has gone wrong. So that would actually help you to build more trust and even attract the bigger partners to you. I mean, there are so many technologies out there you can actually start. I mean, we have chosen to obviously be strong when it comes to high performance data center solutions, when it comes to physical security, which is like CCTV cameras and smart analytics and AI powered analytics and stuff. And on the other side, we have built the ITSM. But maybe that is a good example, maybe, and it will answer that question. Is, I mean, when we developed that portfolio of IT service management, we actually started only with one product, and that was network performance monitoring. But from this technology, we actually found that we have a much faster inroad into a lot of partners. And we listened into the partners, and we found out that they need much more. They need software asset management. They need many other, I mean, remote connectivity, for example, augmented reality, even for the service industry. So that helped us actually to build a nice, let's say, portfolio. And I think that is even what is very important to do, is that, so once you have stick to something, try to find inside there. Don't try to be something in cybersecurity, something in high performance data center solution, something in physical security. Stick to something and then build a portfolio around this with the partners which you are having, and give it some time. It is not as easy as it looks like. And it's this very first thread which you need to find to really start pulling and to get to the big fish at the end.
So would the thread come from downstream, I would imagine, first of all, right? Because if you're talking about providing a solution, you need to understand what the problem is before you even embark on either creating a solution as a manufacturer or finding a manufacturer that makes your solution, right? So if you had if you wanted to go into distribution, you would start with the problem side of the business first before you went to a manufacturer and then try to find a market. Is that
absolutely? I mean, like I mentioned it earlier. I mean, when we were actually, and I was writing articles about this, because I mean, distributors always looking for the next big wave, right? I mean, that's. I mean, we are like surfers in the ocean, and we're looking for this big wave which we can ride. I mean, that's what we
can imagine you as a surfer, Mario.
Huh?
I can imagine you as a surfer, perhaps a bit longer.
Yeah, not at all. I'm probably too tall to actually have a good balance on any of those boards, actually. Anyway, but that was even something which we looked at. Like, I mean, we were really looking like, okay, what could be a big disruptor to the channel? And then we have really started to analyze the market. Who are the players in there? Who do we know from an ecosystem? I mean, it's sometimes like it's this random meeting, the unplanned encounter somewhere in a Costa, in a Starbucks, or on an exhibition, which then leads you into a new contract at the end. But of course, yes, that obviously requires that there must be somewhere a problem, and you need to find the right solution to it. But the beauty of IT is it's so massive. It's growing every day. There's always something new coming up, and believe me or not. We actually selling probably one of the, let's say, oldest IT equipment at all, and we have even actually recently only signed up with it. And these are actually calculators. And the reason why we have signed up with actually it's Texas Instruments, a market which is highly consolidated. You only find two players, it's Casio and Texas Instruments. But the reason why we have taken on this brand, for example, and these calculators, is because obviously they have a lot of other equipment when it comes to robotics, which entails us to actually invest more resources into it. But it gave us a massive entry into the educational sector in the Gulf region, with all the, let's say, international IB schools which are out here. So you can imagine that we're entering the market here with something which is very old-fashioned. It's a calculator. But ultimately, we start even seeing how we can actually get their ICT department, you know, revamp. They have requirements for other stuff. They suddenly have requirements for remote learning and so forth. So sometimes you need to have that little vision of like, is that helping you to get and drive partner engagement?
Yeah, so I think that's a fantastic example of something that perhaps other people will be guilty of dismissing as, like you say, something that's too. I don't know if it's old-fashioned, but too perhaps outdated to even care about. But like you said, you're using it as a conversation starter, I guess, at least to build relationships, to identify, okay, how else can we add value to this partner? And I think, like you say, the education is a massive industry, right? So getting involved in these institutions, it would be, I would imagine, a huge business. It's interesting. Correct. You mentioned another thing I thought was quite interesting, and certainly for this particular period. You mentioned unplanned encounters. Now, at the moment, with the current situation globally, obviously we're seeing conferences being put off or at least postponed, but they're not happening as frequently as obviously we would otherwise like. And conferences are a place whereby, wouldn't necessarily say a lot of business is done per se at them, but certainly it's a venue in which relationships are perhaps first established or built upon. But in the absence of this medium, what are you doing in order to, I guess, have unplanned encounters or build relationships that ordinarily you perhaps wouldn't have to be so strategic in your approach? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I think this is the biggest challenge which we all facing in this current global situation of like meetings actually not happening. I mean, this morning actually we decided to actually along with one of our partners and our vendors to actually go on site. Or arranging a meeting to go on site with a logistics company in Jebel Ali. And we wanted to obviously show commitment. So my team was even asking like, Mario, you know, can you join in as well? I mean, it would be good if we come in there with like, you know, full force and, you know, we can add value to them and can discuss. Yeah. And I mean, the answer from the client was very like, why so many people have to come, right? So, interesting. Yeah. And then they immediately said like, look, listen, I think it's enough if one person comes, they can see it on site on what's happening, so they get a visual idea of what we want to establish. And then the rest we can then meet them through Teams or virtually, so they can actually log into it. Interesting. I mean, it really goes down to that level. But obviously, building relationship through a virtual meeting and let's say virtual boardroom or webinars and everything has certain limitations. I always saying this, I mentioned this earlier as well, it's all about these unplanned meetings and encounters, like, you know, you're meeting the guy you always wanted to speak to at Costas when you pick up your coffee, and then he can't run away from you, he has to talk to you, right? You're standing together in the line, now you need to keep a little bit of distance, like minimum 2 meters, but still, but that is all missing now. So that's, and I tell you, I have many relationships in our vendor contracts which we have, which exactly in that way materialize.
Yeah.
So now what we have to do is obviously we need to find new ways, we need to find creative ways, obviously. Just doing webinars is probably not enough. I'm sure that there's, you know, individuals which are listening right now are not talking to each other outside our conversation. Obviously you have a lot of focus when you run a webinar, but it's not like on a real webinar or seminar where people would actually like meet us. Oh, I saw you before, and this is the connections which is happening. So here again, it's for me a proof that the partners are getting back into the full driver's seat. They are the closest because they have ongoing relationships happening out there, and we need to use them together. So what we need to do is like we need to obviously work on demand generation activities and lead generation activities together, hand in hand. It's not me doing something completely outside and then trying to actually channel it back into the business. No, I need to actually take the partner on board, take the vendor on board, and then basically approaching those customers. But it will remain our biggest challenge, I can tell you. Building, let's say, new opportunities, building new relationships is very critical. And I think for all of those who have done a good job in the past in making sure that customers are first, they will definitely succeed during this time till maybe things will relax a little bit.
Definitely. So it draws into, so you just touched on it already, but the third strategy here is the new client advisory services, as you mentioned already. So having a basket of products, building a portfolio, but then also supporting the partner through lead gen driven campaigns. So are these now more, I guess when you say advisory services, these are when you're advising an OEM how to, or partners on creative ways to approach the market, right? So rather than relying on traditional ways, you're not just handing things off to partners and hoping they sell. It's more about, okay, how can we collaborate and using you guys, I guess, you mentioned as an advisory service, but also a sounding board to some extent to, how can we actually, you've passed the item down the chain, so to speak, but that isn't where your involvement with them ends, is it? It's okay, fine, look, have you considered X, Y, Z, or what about this? So I think it sounds like you're inherently a lot more involved now because there's this need to be more creative than perhaps we have been before.
Well, absolutely, and this is exactly what I mentioned by saying that we need to actually step up. Again, we don't compete with our partners, but if a partner says like, yeah, I mean, that is a great technology. Like, for example, recently we signed up with a company which is leading when it comes to email bots and document bots. So they actually created something like a digital employee, and that has obviously high demand for the insurances business and the banking business, where you have like constant business flows or the same business flows all the time, and the communication is still via emails, for example. So we know the traditional chatbots, but they're going a little step ahead in terms of like having this with emails. And so when we sign up with them, for example, we need to even help them to actually land with the right partners, where we know that they have the right access into those industries, actually, which we're targeting, like the banking and insurances business. But then sometimes we understand that those partners needs to stay efficient as well, and they need to actually making sure that they're actually delivering the numbers on what they have planned. So they maybe have not time towards the end of the year to actually spend time of this very new technology. So this is when we stepping in actually and helping them with the demand generation teams, which we have established in order to help basically promoting these new technologies inside their ecosystem. In order to really funnel down some opportunities, all with the hope, obviously, that at the end the partner sees that there's real business for them, and they will actually focusing and dedicating much more resources. So that is something which we do in order to really help and advising the partners as well. And we actually quite proud to be recognized as a distributor partners turning to if they're even looking for a solution. And then we say, oh yeah, we have something here and we have this, so let's explore this. So which is great.
Yeah. Excellent. So there's perhaps less so now, but certainly over the last few months, I've encountered lots of talk about, you know, pre-COVID-19 and the post-COVID-19 world. But I think the reality is, the more companies and people are coming around to the fact that I certainly don't believe there's any such thing as a post-COVID-19 world, right? We are in COVID-19 world, and it will likely remain to stay for perhaps the rest of our lives, irrespective of whether there's a vaccine or not. So armed with that insight, if you like, so we already know the new behaviors that we need to accommodate from a business perspective and social perspective. Do you think that there are any technologies or let's say trends that we're yet to see emerge when it comes to obviously bringing things to market? So obviously we've encountered the spike in, say, video conferencing tools. We're seeing a lot more interest in switching from capex to opex model as far as cloud computing is concerned, as people look to manage their costs on an ongoing basis. We're seeing people invest more now in cybersecurity. Are there any other trends that you've become aware of because of your interactions with partners and OEMs to some extent that are perhaps yet to be realized at large?
I think yes, we will see obviously this massive acceleration in digital transformation. I mean, there are so many jokes on LinkedIn. You can read about it. Like, I mean, why suddenly like this digital transformation was really accelerated. However, what customers want is they want to have obviously a very agile IT infrastructure, very flexible, flexible in both sides to actually grow it but even to scale it down. So they want that flexibility. And they want to have obviously access from anywhere. Obviously, that is driving a lot of cybersecurity business because obviously all of this needs to be now protected. So it's not just sitting in one little vault and you protect that little vault, but now you have IT everywhere and people can access it from everywhere. But I think what we will definitely see growing a lot is automation. Like what I mentioned in terms of like email bots, we will see more of these digital employees happening. I think that is something which we will start seeing massively over the next years. Obviously, artificial intelligence, analytics. I mean, even that meeting I was telling you about earlier. I mean, that was even in regards how to use artificial intelligence in the logistics. So they wanted to control very specific issues they're having in their infrastructure. And but ultimately, IT is a good place because that is the backbone of everything right now, really. And we can see that, for example, you can see it. I'm working from home, despite the fact that we can go back to the office. But it's so much more convenient. It is so much more productive. I enjoy much better and quality one-to-one discussions with my team, for example, because they would be calling me from their home, I'm calling from my home, so we're not sitting in a large office, and people can listen what's happening, and people feel a little bit intimidated maybe. So it's good. We need to just like see how we can actually use all of this new efficiency which we have to actually turn it into productivity at the end, and maybe using time to scout new disruptive technologies which are out there, putting time aside to maybe join people like yourself, which are maybe not necessarily directly from the industry, but are ultimately helping us even to reach new partners and new contacts. And thank you very much for this, by the way.
No problem at all. One last question from me. Guys, if there's any other questions, please throw them across now and I'll happily read them out. You mentioned the company that you're working with now regarding email bots. Can you just clarify just the concept, and perhaps who would be your target customer? Who would benefit from this product the most?
I mean, from this product, I mean, you can imagine every company which would probably process more than 500 emails per employee per day would massively benefit from this one. So we have an ROI calculator, obviously, for this, because even that's why I said sometimes the business model is very interesting, because they do not charge you like, okay, here's the software, it costs you $100,000. You can have an ROI over 5 years, brilliant thing, and please sign, and then the salesperson is gone. In all of these new business models, for example, it is actually you pay per email with the bot is actually executed. All right. Okay. So there's a one-time setup fee, but then actually it's by the actual number of emails the bot will handle for you, and you can directly compare this to your actual labor cost which you have associated to this work or this specific task. And as I said, I mean, there's so many insurance companies which are still getting emails instead of like, because insurances and banking is still a little bit old economy. I mean, people want to have it a little bit more formal, and email is the prevailing method of communication. So obviously that is something where this company has a number of case studies already. They are from Scandinavia, from Norway, and obviously we're trying to bring this in here in order to help. Again, we are not looking at replacing, let's say, workforce. We're just trying to enhance this, making sure that we can actually allocate these resources to something which probably needs more time. I was actually using this as an example. If somebody, for example, a wife, a widow, has to claim her husband's life insurance, I mean, it's not a very pleasant discussion you need to start. And maybe it's better if insurance companies probably have more resources to probably do this on a face-to-face discussion rather than through a very formal process, right? So let other not that sensitive processes maybe go through an email bot, and then allocated those resources to have more human touch again. So it is not just, it is to the benefit of us as humans at the end, because sometimes we tend to be a little bit scared of hearing about robots and, you know, replacing us eventually.
I remember in school some 25, well, maybe a bit longer than that, a long time ago, let's say, when we were told that robots would replace us in the workplace at some point. It's not happened yet, at least unless perhaps you work in manufacturing to some extent. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day. I have something interesting that I'll share with you offline. We just had another question actually from Prakash. So Prakash has asked, what strategy should be adopted to convince channel partners to promote niche products?
I think, you see, it's all about adding value to them and make it as easy as possible. I mean, I'm always talking about like lowering the borders of entry. Obviously, if you make it too complicated for a partner to actually get on board, I mean, I had this conversation even earlier this week. A vendor wants to sign us, and he wants us to invest $15,000 just like to train one of the resources which we have. Where you say, like, look, listen, I mean, I don't know if this is really viable, because we don't know what is really coming out of it, right? So I think it's important to actually work and support the partner to actually get to some level of business, so that you can really come back and say, look, listen, now you can see you start earning money. And now you need to reinvest into this one, right? So let me go slightly back and now you drive the business. And this is how we normally do it. We actually helping the partners as much as possible to land the first deal, to support on the first deal, support them technically, having shadow activities, their engineers joining our engineers when they do their first installation. But then we need to gradually getting out of it. What I have unfortunately seen in distribution is that too many distributors are actually hanging on to this one. Which is wrong. You have to actually, again, take these resources and put it onto a different vendor. Once you see that you have your 10 vendors and your 10 partners and your 100 opportunities which you're already working.
Yeah,
so make it easy. I think that's the answer to Prakash. Make it easy for the partners to work alongside you, and obviously build the trust in this partner so that he's opening up his ecosystem to you. And again, for that is the trust you need to earn by making sure that you don't give him the feeling that you are a Trojan horse of stealing his contacts and then probably do something with it behind his back.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you mentioned about, you know, perhaps being a launch partner with a partner, and then you're offering the support, but it's making that that launch period perhaps very transparent, so they're not nervous about your involvement beyond a certain stage. But I think that being a launch partner to some extent will, I think, give the partner the reassurance or confidence to try something new as well. Like you said, making it as easy for them as possible. Fantastic. Well, look, I don't think there's no more questions. So look, with that, that's all we have time for today, unfortunately. I think we could probably speak, like we've had a few hours conversation about this already, but look, Mario, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. I've thoroughly enjoyed this session. So as I mentioned to you at the beginning of the call, guys, if you'd like a copy of the white paper I mentioned, please just type white paper in the chat box and I'll assure that you get a copy once that's prepared. Also, if you'd like to become a member of the mastermind community, again, just type mastermind in the chat box, and then either myself or one of my team will reach out to you in the next couple of days to discuss that further. But that's it for this week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. I think the next topic will be along the lines of cybersecurity. So if you have any recommendations or suggestions about either topic or speakers that you'd like for us to bring on the roster, please do let me know, because we're obviously interested in delivering content that's relevant for our audience. So that's it. Mario, thank you once again.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you, and see you next time.
Great. Take care, guys. Have a great day.